Hello friend, I hope you all are doing well and staying safe at your own place. I, CA Pujin Kapadia, welcome you all on my today's lecture on the subject Mercantile Law. Friends, today we are going to commence with a new topic, the name of which is consideration. We have been studying the Indian Contract Act 1872, under which today we are going to cover the topic of consideration. Today, basically, we are going to deal with two topics. First is definition of consideration, and second is legal rules, or you can say essential elements of consideration. Let's start with the first one. This slide shows the definition of consideration as per Indian Contract Act 1872. First of all, you need to remember this section. The definition is defined under section 2 clause D. Yes friends, it is 2 clause D. Now let's read out the definition. When at the desire of promisor. So first important point which is written over here is when at the desire of promisor. So here who is desiring? Basically the person who is promising. Fine. So when anything is being done at the desire of promisor. Second is the promisee or any other person. So either the promisee, that is the person to whom the promise is made. Now let's recall our example. I was going to start a startup and I was visiting some person to get investment. Fine. So I was visiting venture capitalist and asking him to invest in my company. Now venture capitalist said yes. So basically he is accepting and he is giving me the promise. So who is the promiser over here? Venture capitalist. Now at the desire of promiser, either the promisee, that is me, or any other person on my behalf. Fine. So basically in the first 2 points we have read. First is when at the desire of promiser. So basically desire is of the promiser, the person who is making the promise. Second is the promisee or any other person. That is the person to whom the promise is made or any other person. Now there are three activities which are written over here. First is has done or abstained from doing. I hope you know the meaning of this words. Fine. Has done मतलब कुछ किया है and abstain from doing मतलब कुछ नहीं किया है. This is basically the past tense. Please focus on the words. It is has done or abstained from doing. Or second is it does or abstains from doing. This is representing the present tense. And the third is promises to do or to abstain from doing. This is your future tense. In short, there are three lines that are important over here. First is it has done or abstained from doing. It does or abstains from doing. It promises to do or abstain from doing something. It can be anything. Then such act or abstinence or promise is called consideration of the promise. So let's take the example to clear it out. In our example, I want investment in my company. So I approach venture capitalist. I gave a proposal to venture capitalist to come and invest in my company. Now venture capitalist said yes, that I am ready to invest this much amount in your company. Now he has given me the promise. So basically who is the promiser? Venture capitalist. Now for this particular promise I need to give something in return. So what I did is I agreed that I am going to pay 50% of the profit that I am going to earn from the business. So here what is the consideration, friends? Consideration is 50% in the profit. Now here who is giving this consideration? The promisee, that is the person to whom the promise was made. Now if I am not giving the consideration and if promisor is okay with any other person to receive consideration, it is fine. So the consideration can be moving either from the promisee or any other person, but it should be at the desire of promisor. That is, agar promisor ko wo chalta hai, then it is totally fine. So basically what is written over here? When at the desire of promisor, the promisee or any other person. Now there are three types which we are again going to see in the essential features: present tense, past tense, present tense and future tense. That is, he has done or abstained from doing anything, he does or abstains from doing anything, or he promises to do or to abstain from doing anything. Like कुछ करने के लिए या कुछ ना करने के लिए. That is doing and abstain from doing. It can be anything. Fine. Paying money, giving some services, giving some goods. It can be anything. Fine. Then such act or abstinence or such promise is called consideration of promise. It is defined under section 2 clause D. I hope I'm clear with this particular point. So here you need to basically remember 3 points. First, who is desiring? So the desire is of the promiser. Who is actually giving something? Either the promisee or any other person. And it can be in all the three types like past, present and future. So your consideration may be past, it may be in present or it may be in future. And it is section 2 clause D. I hope I'm clear with the definition. Yes, we are going to more clear it out in the next topic. Next topic is legal rules as to consideration, or we can say essential features of consideration. So if any of this topic comes in your examination, then you are going to write the following answer. First point is, as we have seen in the first point, it must move at the desire of promiser. As we have seen, whose desire is required? The desire of promiser is required. So one should give consideration at the desire of promiser. So first point that I have written over here is consideration must proceed at the request of promiser. In our example, venture capitalist give us affirmation that he is ready to invest. So he is requesting, now what I am going to get in return? So I said that you are going to get 50% of the profit. So basically who requested? The request was coming from the promiser. So my consideration that I am giving is moving. Why? Because it was being desired by the promiser. Second point is any acts which are done voluntarily, that is not with any perfect motive, it is just a voluntary part, or at the request of the third person, do not constitute the good consideration. So what is the important point over here? To form a good consideration, it is compulsory, it should be coming at the desire of promiser. If anyone is doing any act which is voluntarily or at the request of third party, then it is not constituting the good consideration. Let's take an example over here. Mr. A saves Mr. B from drowning in the river without being asked to do so. So Mr. A saw that Mr. B was drowning in the river. वो डूब रहा था, fine. As a result of which he dived and saved the life of Mr. B. Now no one has told Mr. A that you had to do this. He was doing it voluntarily. So in this particular case, A cannot demand payment of his services, being it was a voluntary act. I hope you are clear. Fine. So basically consideration is good only if it is being desired or it is being requested by the promiser. If you are doing out something voluntarily, it is not going to form a good consideration. Fine. And this is the example. I hope you are clear with the first point. Fine. Let's move to the second one. The consideration may move from promisee or from any other person. Now here the important point is the consideration that I am giving, it should be moving. Who is giving this consideration? It is being given by either the promisee or any other person. So basically either the promisee, that is the person to whom the promise is made. In our example, the promise was made to me. Fine, because I was starting the startup. So I am known as promisee and I gave the consideration of 50% in profit. So either it should move from promisee or from any other person. Now, as per Indian law, the consideration may be moving from the promisee, as I have told you, or consideration may move from any other person. So, if promiser is okay, and if the consideration is moving from any other person who is not promisee, then also that consideration will be considered as valid. So, you can say there can be a stranger who can give consideration. Let's read the entire part so that we can come to know the example. D, who was daughter of Mr. A, received some property from A and entered into agreement with U. Let's read it again so that you can clarify the scenario. D, who was daughter of Mr. A, fine. She received some property from Mr. A and entered into agreement with U. Who was U? U was her uncle to pay him annuity. So the scenario says like Mr. A has given some property to her daughter D. Fine. Now D has entered into an agreement with his uncle U. Fine. To give him annuity. That is, every year she is going to pay him some lump sum amount. Later on, D refused to pay the annuity on the contention that she has not received any consideration from the U. Who is U? Basically the promisee. So basically the promise over here is who has promised? D, the daughter, has promised to whom? To her uncle U. What she has promised? That I am going to pay you annuity. That is, every year I am going to pay you certain sum of money. Later on, she refused to pay the same. Why? Because she is telling that I have not received any consideration from you. Then why should I pay this part? Are you getting this example? So the contention of the daughter D is here that she has not received any consideration from her uncle U. And why should she be paying the amount of annuity? What was held in the case? D, that is the daughter, is liable to pay to his uncle U because she had received consideration from A, that is the other person, his father. Now, in this particular scenario, what I want to say is, in this particular case, the promise was made by D to whom? To her uncle U to pay the annuity. Now the contention of D was that I am not going to pay you. Why? Because I have not received anything as consideration from you. So in this particular case, consideration is not moving from promisee. It is not moving from promisee. It is the person to whom the promise has made. He is not giving anything to the D, that is the daughter. But at the same time, D, the daughter, is receiving property. So she is receiving some consideration. From whom? From A, that is some another person. Mr. A was not a part of promise, but she has received consideration from other person. Yes, so she is liable to pay annuity to her uncle. So basically, it is not compulsory that consideration should come from promisee only. It may also come from any other person. Important point over here is this only, that you need to remember. It is not compulsory that only promisee can give you consideration. Even some any other person can give you the consideration. So in this particular case, who were the parties to promise? There were two parties, D, the daughter, and U, the uncle. So they two were the parties to basically consideration. But in this particular point, who is the stranger? Who is the third person who is giving the consideration? Mr. A, that is the father of D. So I can say that stranger to consideration can sue to enforce the contract. So even I am a stranger, it is not an issue. If I am a part of consideration, I can sue for the performance of the contract. In short, in this particular case also, though the case was between D and U, but since the consideration was received from A, she is liable to pay the annuity to her uncle. I hope I'm clear with this particular slide. I'm giving you a moment. Take a quick view on all the contents on this particular slide. Well, I hope you are clear with this particular point. Yes, fine. Let's move to the third point. As we have seen in definition, we had learned the consideration may be past, may be present, or may be future. Let's take win-win examples in the meaning of the past consideration, present consideration, and future consideration. First point is when the consideration of one party was given before the date of promise. That is, when you are giving the promise, you are passing on the consideration before making the promise. So before the date of promise, only one party has given the consideration. Then such is the case of past consideration. Let's understand this with an example. Mr. A found purse of Miss B and returned the same without any expectation of any reward. Later on, B promised to pay reward for the same. So basically, what is the scenario over here? A has performed his part of service, you can say, to B by returning the purse, what he has found. Later on, B had made a promise that she is going to pay reward to Mr. A. So promise is coming at the latter end, but the part of activity which was supposed to be performed, like doing such act or abstinence from doing, fine. So here it was doing the act. Doing the act means returning the purse. So it was performed before the date of promise, as a result of which such consideration is known as past consideration. I hope I'm clear with this. Okay. Second one is when consideration moves simultaneously with promise, it is known as present or executed consideration. What they're trying to say is, in the past one, it was like, first of all, you are passing on the consideration and then you are making the promise. In the second scenario, it is like you are passing the consideration and you are making the promise at the same time, that is simultaneously. Then such is known as present or executed consideration. Example, Mr. A buys goods from the shop and immediately pays for the same. So what I'm doing is I'm going to the shop, I'm purchasing the goods, and at the same time I'm making the payment of the goods. So on one hand, I'm receiving goods, that is I'm receiving the goods from the shopkeeper, and at the same time I'm making payment of the same. So I'm passing on money from me to the shopkeeper. So basically the promise and the consideration are being taking place simultaneously, as a result of which this is known as present consideration or executed consideration. Third point is when consideration is to move at a future date, it is known as future or executory consideration. So here I am not giving anything as of now. I am agreeing to give consideration at some future date. Fine, that is something in future. It is known as future or executory consideration. Let's see the example. It is written over here. Mr. A promises to pay money at a future date for the goods to be delivered by B at a future date. So here basically they are entering into an agreement that A is telling that I am promising you to pay money for the goods you are going to deliver me at a future date. So basically both the events, that is payment of money and delivery of goods, are not going to take as of now. They are going to take place at a future date. If this is the scenario, then it is known as future or executory consideration. I hope you are clear with all three. What is past consideration, what is present or executed consideration, and what is future or executory consideration. Take a quick view on all the 3 points, students. Well, I hope you are clear with all the 3 parts. Okay, let's move ahead. Fourth point is consideration need not be adequate. What they're telling is you should be having consideration to form a valid contract, but it is not necessary that your consideration should be adequate. Now, what is it? Let's study in this particular slide. First, what is consideration? I hope you are aware with this word that I have taught you in the initial lectures also. Consideration means something in return. That is, if you are performing any duties, like if you are providing any goods or if you are providing any services, you expect something in return. Like what I was doing is, I was asking for venture capitalists. So venture capitalists said, okay, that I am going to invest in your company, but what I'm going to get in return? So I was giving 50% of share in my profit. So that is nothing, that is something in return. So what is consideration? Something in written. Law requires the presence of consideration, but it does not inquire the adequacy thereof. Now, what is law saying is they require the presence of consideration. What they are saying is if there is no consideration, then no contract is possible. So consideration zaruri hai. There should be consideration. But how much? it is not important. So they are not inquiring into adequacy thereof. Now let's take an example so you will understand what I want to say is Mr. A agrees to sell a horse worth rupees 1 lakh at rupees 1000. So the horse whose value was rupees 1 lakh is being agreed to be sold by Mr. A at rupees 1000 only. So जो 1 lakh का गुड था कितने में सेल हो रहा है 1000 में. His consent to agreement was freely given. There was no force, there was no influence, nothing. He was totally free and he freely gave his consent to this particular agreement to sell his horse valued 1 lakh rupees but at rupees 1000. The agreement is the contract notwithstanding the inadequacy of consideration. This is going to be the valid contract. Why? Because what law says, they want the presence of consideration. Like consideration hona chahiye, no matter whether it is 1 lakh or 1000. So adequacy is not the thing that is to be looked upon by the law. What law looks for is the presence of consideration. This is basically your heading. So consideration needs to be there, but it need not to be adequate. So it is not important how much, it should be present. This is it. Fine. The last point is adequacy of consideration. That is whether it is enough as compared to the service or goods you are providing or not. That is adequacy of consideration is for the parties to consider at the time of making an agreement, not for the court when it is sought to be enforced. So basically what they are telling is the question that whether your consideration is sufficient, adequate or not, it is supposed to be looked upon by the parties who are entering into an agreement at the time of making the agreement. It is not to be looked upon by the law, fine, at the time of enforcing the same. So important point is law is not going to interfere whether the consideration is adequate or not. What law says is there should be consideration to form a valid contract. I hope I'm clear with this. So basically consideration should be present. Doesn't matter whether it is adequate or not adequate. Okay, fine. Let's move to the next point. Consideration must be real. It should not be illusory. Fine. So what they want is what you are giving something in written. It should be real, practical. Fine. It should not be imaginary, illusory. Fine. Let's see. First point is instances of consideration which are not real. So we are going to see 3 points in which there may be the consideration, but they are not real. They are not practically possible. The first is physical impossibility. Mr. A promised to bring the moon from the sky on the earth. Now this is something which is impossible act, which is impossible to perform. So though he has given the promise that he is going to bring moon from the sky, but it is practically not possible because it is not real. As a result of which it is not a good consideration. Second is legal impossibility. A owes rupees 500 to B. A को B को कितने रुपीस देने हैं 500 rupees. So A is owing rupees 500 to Mr. B. He promises to pay rupees 100 to C, nephew of B, and C in return what he is promising to discharge A from the debt. So what is the scenario over here? A is supposed to pay 500 rupees to B. Now what A is doing? He is making a promise to C. So first of all, the promise should be made to B. But what he is promising to the third person, who is C. Who is C? He is the nephew of Mr. B. And C is acknowledging that in return, he is promising to discharge A. He is telling, okay, now your account with B is going to be settled. Now in this particular case, this is legally impossible. Why? Because of 2 reasons. First reason is actually B need to promise in return, but it is being promised by C. This is something wrong. And secondly, this is legally not possible. Why? Because the party with whom I was supposed to settle the account is not coming in picture of my promise. As a result of which such consideration is legally impossible. So again, it is not real. So first was physical impossibility, that you are not able to perform that because it is impossible. Second is legal impossibility, that is legally it is not possible. Third is already existing public duty. For example, Mr. A promises to pay certain sum of money to the judge J to give the judgment. So what is the scenario over here? Mr. A is promising to the judge that you give judgment in my case. He is not telling whether in my favor or against me, just you give judgment in my case and I am going to pay you certain money. Now giving judgment is already the duty of judge. Fine. So as a result of which, if you are getting anything to perform your own duties only, and it is not the consideration, because वो तो आपकी duty ही थी. Fine. So the work you are supposed to do and you are getting consideration to do the same additionally, and it is not going to be the part of consideration. It is not real. So all these three instances are the instances where the consideration is not real. It may be physical impossibility, there may be legal impossibility, or it is for already existing public duty. But when the person does something more than what he is bound to do, he is doing something extra than what he was supposed to do, fine, then it is a good consideration. So if I am doing something more than what I was supposed to do, then it is considered that I am doing something, and whatsoever I am getting is a good consideration for that extra thing. So जो करना था वही कर रहा हूँ, then it is not a consideration. But if I am doing something extra and I am getting paid something more for that particular part, then it will be considered as a good consideration. I hope I'm clear with this topic. So basically, consideration must be real. It should not be illusory. Okay, fine. The last point is consideration should not be illegal, immoral, or opposed to public policy. I guess you remember all these three words. We have taken these three words at the time of studying the answer. Essentials of valid contract, section 10. Remember? Let's recall it once again. So what they're telling is your consideration should not be illegal, it should not be immoral, and it should not be opposed to public policy. Section 23 over here says courts do not allow action on contract when the consideration is illegal. An example of illegal thing is in Gujarat, we all know that liquor is banned. Now, if I'm entering into an agreement that I'm going to sell you liquor for some money, then it is illegal. Second is immoral. When a landlord is renting his property to a tenant doing child trafficking. Now, child trafficking is something which is wrong, which is social evil. Now, I was knowing the purpose that the person to whom I'm giving my flat on rent is going to use this particular flat for child trafficking only. So what I have done is I have done something. I have entered into a contract to receive the consideration which is immoral. The third is any act which is against the public policy. Now basically let's understand consideration in public policy means restricting the freedom of person for the good of community. So basically if I'm restricting the freedom of some person, why I'm restricting so? Because it is in a good of the entire community. Like for example, I restricted the person from trading with an alien enemy. For example, as of now, I am having harsh relationship with any of the country. So we have decided that we are not going to enter into any trade with this country. Our government has decided the same and it is a rule. But now what I'm doing is I am making a contract which is against the public policy. Ideally, I should not enter into the agreement of trading with that particular country. But what I have done is I have entered into that agreement. So the consideration is you give me this much money, I am going to sell my product to your country. Now, this is something which is against policy, public policy, which is again not a valid action or valid consideration. In short, the consideration should not be illegal, it should not be immoral, and it should not be opposed to public policy. You are having the examples for the same, so I guess you are clear with this part also. So basically friends, what we have covered today is the definition that we had studied initially, under which you need to remember 3 points. First is defined under section 2 clause D, when at the desire of promisor. Desire lies with the promisor. Who is giving the consideration? Either the promisee or any other person. Three types, that is past, present, and future consideration. It can be anything. Such act or abstinence or promise is known as consideration. Second point is essential elements. First is it should be moving at the desire of promisor. It should not be voluntarily. Second is any person can pay the same, either the promisee or it can flow from any other person. That I gave you the example of daughter, father, and uncle. Fine. Third is it may be past, it may be present, or it may be future. Fourth is need not to be adequate. Consideration must be there, but how much it is not important. Fifth is it must be real. It should not be illusory. It should not be something which is physically impossible, legally impossible. That is already the existing public duty. If you are giving something more because you are doing something more than your duties, then it is going to be considered as a good consideration. And the last part we had covered is it should not be illegal, immoral, against public policy. I hope you are clear with two questions that I have covered today. Now let's quickly take the test your knowledge series. I'm giving you three questions. Fine. You need to keep your answers ready. After completion of all the three, we are going to discuss the correct answers. So your time starts now. Well, I hope you might have marked your correct answers. So let's check each of them. First one was definition of consideration is defined under section. Correct answer is option D. It is to clause D. Fine. So correct answer is option D. Second, we all know consideration can be past, can be present, it can be future. So the correct answer is option D. All of this. It can be past, where before the date of promise you have done your activity. It can be present, where we are doing both the things simultaneously, and it can be future, where both the things are going to take place at a future date. So correct answer is option D. All of this. Third question is, a stranger to consideration can enforce the same. We had already studied this in the example of daughter, father, and uncle. Basically, the promise was between the daughter to pay annuity to the uncle, but daughter refused, that she has not received anything from the uncle. But here the point was held that she has received property from the father. So consideration may come from the stranger. As a result of which, this is a correct statement. Stranger to a consideration can enforce the same. So correct option is option A. This is a true one. I hope you might have got all the answers correctly. With this, I, CA Pujan Kapadia, thank you all for your patient listening, and I hope to see you soon in my upcoming lecture. Thank you, friends.